Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Gaurav Sharma and with me is Renuka bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. At least 13 people killed including children in twin blasts outside airport in Afghanistan. Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar briefs leaders of different political parties over current situation in Afghanistan, says evacuating Indians is the top priority of the government. Tajikistan asserts it will not recognize any government in Afghanistan formed through oppression. 4 days sea phase exercise Malabar 2021 begins. India participates with US and Australian naval forces. UN scientists warn search for origins of coronavirus stalled as Chinese officials reluctant to share raw data. More than 60 crore 38 lakh vaccine doses of COVID-19 administered in India so far. And in cricket, England fortifies its position against India with 398 runs in its first innings of the third test at Leeds. As a nationwide free COVID-19 vaccination campaign at government facilities for those above 18 years is underway, we advise our young listeners to get vaccinated and help others get vaccinated. We also advise our listeners not to lower their guard as COVID-19 remains a threat to our health. Please stay at home unless it is essential to go out and continue to follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki doori for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now, the news in detail. In Afghanistan, at least 13 people, including children, were killed as 2 explosions took place near the Kabul airport this evening amid a massive evacuation effort by Western countries. United States Department of Defense spokesperson John Kirby confirmed that the first blast took place near the Abbey Gate of the airport. About 30 minutes later, he confirmed another explosion near Baron Hotel, a short distance from Abbey Gate. He added that the attack resulted in a number of U.S. and civilian casualties. The explosion came hours after the United States, Australia and the United Kingdom issued 3 separate warnings about a threat of an attack by an affiliate of the terrorist group Islamic State at the Kabul airport. Diplomatic and foreign officers of the 3 countries had urged people to evacuate the airport. The warnings also came as NATO allies, including Poland and Belgium, ended their evacuation efforts ahead of an August 31 deadline for the US troops to exit Afghanistan. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has said that the situation in Kabul has seriously deteriorated and his country is coordinating with US allies to evacuate a maximum number of people. Macron's remarks came in the wake of today's twin explosions in the Afghan capital, in which at least 13 people were killed. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has condemned the Kabul attack and vowed to continue evacuations from Afghanistan. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is set to hold emergency talks over the Kabul explosion. Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar on Thursday said that the government and the opposition parties all have a very similar view on Afghanistan. He said all parties have a strong national position on Afghanistan. Speaking to reporters after briefing leaders of different political parties in New Delhi today, Mr. Jaishankar said a friendship with Afghan people matters to India. He said there is a long-standing national sentiment on Afghanistan and therefore there is a national concern now at the developments. The minister added that India's strong friendship with the people of Afghanistan is reflected in more than 500 projects India is undertaking there. He said India's immediate concern and task is evacuation of its nationals from Afghanistan and the long-term interest is friendship for the Afghan people. Mr. Jaishankar emphasized that all Indians will be evacuated. Our correspondent quoting sources reports that during the meeting, the External Affairs Minister highlighted India's priorities in the current circumstances. He briefed the leaders about the evacuation of Indian nationals, the safety of diplomatic personnel, and the assistance to Afghan nationals in distress. He also briefed them about the international coordination and humanitarian efforts and the upcoming UNHRC session in Geneva. The leaders of 31 political parties attended the meeting. Talking to the media after the meeting, senior Congress leader Mallikarjun Kharge said, "This is the entire country's problem," and stressed the need to work together for the interests of the people and the nation. The External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar spoke to the UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab yesterday. The conversation focused on the current developments in Afghanistan. Dr. Jaishankar also spoke to Saudi Arabia's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Adil Al-Jubair and discussed regional and multilateral issues. He welcomed the relaxation of COVID restrictions on travel.
Tajikistan has stated that it will not recognize any government in Afghanistan that is formed through oppression. In a statement, Tajik President Emomali Rahman on Thursday said it will not recognize an Afghan government that is not inclusive and representative of all its ethnic groups. The Tajikistan president said evidence clearly shows that the Taliban are abandoning their previous promises to form an interim government with the broad participation of other political forces in the country and are preparing to establish an Islamic emirate. Tajikistan strongly condemned all forms of lawlessness, murder, looting and persecution of the Afghan people, especially Tajiks, Uzbeks and other national minorities, he added. The statement comes following the meeting between President of Tajikistan and Pakistan Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. In a major development, the German diplomat has said that the Taliban will continue to allow Afghans who have the right documents to leave Afghanistan after the US withdrawal deadline. German Ambassador Markus Potzel, who is negotiating with the Taliban in Doha on Thursday, said on Twitter its deputy chief negotiator Sher Mohammad Abbas Staniszai assured him that Afghans with legal documents will continue to have the opportunity to travel on commercial flights after 31st of this month. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has said Germany will still try to help Afghans who work with its soldiers and aid organizations and wish to leave Afghanistan even after the deadline. According to the German Defense Ministry, its military aircraft have so far rescued over 4,600 people, including German citizens and local support workers.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on geopolitical scenario in Afghanistan and its implications on India. In conversation are T.C.A. Raghavan, a former ambassador, and Simran Sodhi, a journalist.
We have seen in the last 10 days the Taliban take over Afghanistan and the geopolitics of the region has changed drastically. The government called a meeting of opposition parties and the government also informed that the immediate priority is the evacuation of all Indians from Afghanistan, and the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar also said that we have brought back most Indians but not all, and there were some who could not make it for yesterday's flight. We are also aware that India has started an e-visa policy and the evacuation process is underway. Ambassador Raghavan, when we see this situation in Afghanistan, how do you assess the situation and how do you see this evacuation process which is currently underway?
The situation as it has unfolded in Afghanistan over the past 2 weeks in total constitute a setback for us, because the government with which we had very good and very close relations, and in a new kind of system in which we had also helped a great deal and which had been in existence for 20 years, that government and that system has in effect disappeared. So in overall foreign policy terms, this development is a setback. The point also is that this setback has been a consequence not as a result of anything arising from the India-Afghanistan interface, but because of developments which are unrelated to India and Afghanistan. The most important reason was internal developments within Afghanistan. There was also the role of the Pakistan-Afghanistan interface. And finally, there was a wider international churn. And this entire process was in fact triggered by the United States withdrawing its military presence in Afghanistan without giving adequate time, in a sense, for the Afghan security forces to gear themselves up to face a Taliban military offensive, which they were already facing. For us, right now, the immediate priority has to be of evacuating Indian citizens and others who are at risk. But that evacuation process, whether by India or by other countries, is really a small part of the entire situation in Afghanistan today, because the drama which is being played out in Kabul airport and all the somewhat distressing scenes which are emerging from there is really a small part only of the overall situation in Afghanistan.
Ambassador Raghavan, we also see that we have a lot of actors in Afghanistan today. We have Pakistan, which a lot of analysts believe is in a stronger position, especially when we compare it to India's position. And we also see a China-Pakistan nexus, which is growing in Afghanistan. And also late July, we saw Taliban delegation going to China, and the Chinese seem to be opening up to talking with the Taliban and investing in Afghanistan. How do you see this development?
Well, in your neighborhood and in your region in which you are situated, nothing ever remains static. There was a particular order which existed for 20 years and which we helped a great deal in and which we thought was favorable to us because we felt it had the best chance of restoring stability in a war-torn country. As I said, that order has now come apart. And certainly Pakistan had never made a secret of the fact that it felt excluded by the developments which had taken place in Afghanistan in the past 20 years. To that extent, the fact that the Taliban, which was an instrument Pakistan used to restore its influence in Afghanistan, to that extent, Pakistan has certainly gained. But I think if one looks at events from a medium and longer term, a more complex picture rather than simple gains and losses will emerge. And I think that medium-term picture will suggest that we are going to see a situation in Afghanistan which may very well see a repeat of what was witnessed in the past. It is possible that may not happen. It is possible that the Taliban will take more moderate postures, that it will not allow the territory of Afghanistan to be used as a base for terrorist attacks elsewhere. But given the realities of the situation, it is entirely possible that we will see Afghanistan slipping back into the kind of chaos which took place there in the 1990s. Now, when that happens, I think Pakistan will face a considerable blowback from these developments. And while its short-term gains, while its short-term objectives of reasserting its political position in Afghanistan may have been realized, the medium-term consequences of this may not be to Pakistan's advantage.
Ambassador Raghavan, another thing that is being discussed quite at length these days is the U.S. decision. And President Joe Biden has come under a lot of critique for his decision to withdraw the troops in this rapid fashion. How much do you think does the blame lie with the U.S.? And do you think this withdrawal could have been done in a better fashion?
The United States, for at least 10 years, had made no secret of the fact that it wanted to draw down, end its military mission in Afghanistan. So to that extent, the withdrawal was not a surprise. But certainly I agree that the manner in which the end game was executed and the way it was done without prepping the Afghan security forces to be able to shoulder the burden on their own, that certainly was a process which suggests significant judgment failures and poor execution. The fact that they were going to leave was evident because it was very clear for some time that U.S. forces had become part of the problem in Afghanistan and were no longer the solution. But certainly they could have planned this and executed this much better. And to that extent, whatever gloss is put on it by the United States government, this represents a considerable failure of U.S. policy in the region, and it is a major blow against Western and U.S. prestige in the region.
Ambassador Raghavan, where do you think India stands today? We were also, as a country, very invested in the government of Ashraf Ghani. How do you assess India's position today vis-a-vis not just the Taliban but Afghanistan, and how do we go forward from this position?
I think we were greatly interested in ensuring the strength and continuity of the system that came into being post 9/11. And while we supported President Ghani, it is also a fact that we supported his predecessor also, and our support was not so much personal, but as for the system that had come into existence and the architecture that was created. It is quite evident that architecture was much weaker and perhaps much hollower than people had believed, and there were structural weaknesses. But I don't think anyone could have anticipated that it would fold up so very quickly, and that is related, as I said, to certain errors of judgment on the parts of the United States in terms of the implementation and execution of the final withdrawal. I think right now our mission has closed. Most of the Indian nationals have been evacuated. We are in a position where we have to really watch developments very carefully before taking any decisions on how to move ahead. The fact is, in the past 20 years, our developmental programs, the kind of hardware which our assistance has created, the education we have provided for 2 generations of Afghans, all those are major long-term gains for us, and those cannot be eroded or will not be forgotten for a long time to come. They are, in a sense, our biggest asset in Afghanistan. For the rest, we'll have to monitor developments and see what happens. As I said earlier, it is good to be skeptical about what position the Taliban will take and skeptical about what it says and see the difference between what it says and what it actually does on the ground. But at the same time, we should not prejudge it. It is possible that what they say, that they are trying to construct a broad-based inclusive government, may well happen. And if that happens, then we can reassess our position and take a decision on our future relationship with Afghanistan. But as I said, the whole world is skeptical about this, and so should we be skeptical. And we should monitor developments carefully. At this stage, I don't think there is much we can do beyond this, beyond trying to reach out to the Afghan people. While the political events have taken a turn which led to our closure of our embassy, we should not end up in a situation that we lock ourselves out of Afghanistan. So we should remain open in terms of people-to-people contacts, in terms of facilitating medical visas, educational visas. It's good we have started an electronic visa system, and we should try to use it and expand it to the full.
Ambassador Raghavan, we saw that the External Affairs Minister today, while speaking to the all-party meet, also informed that Prime Minister Modi had spoken to the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, and that the Prime Minister also discussed the issue with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. And he said there will be more such high-level calls in the days to come. How important do you think it is then for these countries to cooperate, and especially for India, that we are maybe on the same page with, say, Russia when it comes to Afghanistan, if we take a different position to, say, China?
Well, as of now, we should certainly remain engaged with all the countries which have an interest in Afghanistan. And this would not just be the European and the Western powers, but also Afghanistan's neighbors, Iran you mentioned, but also Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and others. It is good to remain engaged with them. With Iran, we have, of course, a very strong relationship in many ways. That relationship has come under strain because of U.S. sanctions. But we should try to see that our relationship remains insulated from external factors. And specifically on Afghanistan, the Chabahar Port Initiative is another long-term asset for Afghanistan, which we should continue to work on, regardless of the developments taking place today in Afghanistan itself. So remaining engaged with all players is certainly an advisable step, and I'm sure we'll see much more of it in the future. But we must also be conscious of the fact that while all the countries have a general agreement that stability in Afghanistan is in their long-term interest, but on other factors, there are differences which exist because all countries see developments in Afghanistan in terms of their own national interests. So there is a certain divergence between the Iranian position and ours, between the Russian position and ours, and even the Chinese position and ours. And this has a lot to do with how these countries view the United States and their own bilateral relations with the United States. So those factors have also been somewhat instrumental in affecting the way the Afghanistan situation has developed. So in my view, while Afghanistan is important in India's foreign policy, our foreign policy interests as a whole are much wider. So whether it is China, whether it is Russia, whether it is Iran, or in fact, even if it is Pakistan, we should not let Afghanistan become a kind of a litmus test of how we conduct our bilateral relations or how we judge the quality of our relationship with each of these countries.
Ambassador Raghavan, we've also seen a Northern Alliance coming up again. Do you believe that they can offer some kind of a resistance to the Taliban?
Certainly, there is an element of resistance to the Taliban because of the very swift manner in which events unfolded. And I think this resistance will grow stronger. But we will have to also see whether the Taliban actually go about constructing a more inclusive framework of governance, or not. I think on that will depend the nature of the resistance and other factors. But I think it is too early at this stage to make any informed predictions about what will happen vis-a-vis so-called Northern Alliance. I don't think we should expect a replay of events in the same way as they took place in the 1990s. And even if that kind of replay takes place, I think developments have to mature and crystallize on the ground much more. Because we should not forget that given the rapidity at which an entire system was overthrown, that does suggest that that system was weaker and hollower than many of us had assumed. And therefore, there may well be a greater acceptability of the Taliban, provided they take the right kind of decisions and do actually move towards creating an inclusive system. Whether that happens or not, one can't say. But all these factors about the resistance to them, whether some new alliance of resistance will emerge internally in Afghanistan, I think all of this is still, we are at a very early stage of the whole process.
Ambassador Raghavan, just very briefly, in the end, if you were to say that these are the 2 or 3 areas of focus that India has to keep in mind as we follow the developments in Afghanistan and also look to position ourselves regionally.
For the first point I would focus on was to be open to people contacts, to educational contacts, to medical assistance, and so on. The second point I would say is that we must remain connected regionally with all of Afghanistan's neighbors, and in particular Iran and the Central Asian neighbors, because they are much closer to the scene than we should try to use that particular expertise which they may have and build it into our analysis. And the third and most important point I would say is that we should not approach events in Afghanistan with a confirmation bias or a cognitive bias. In other words, we should keep an open mind while remaining skeptical. We should keep an open mind on how the Taliban is going to govern this country and then take a decision on it. I don't think we should approach it from a prejudged position or on the basis of our earlier perceptions of what had happened.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Indian Navy is participating in the sea phase of Exercise Malabar 2021 along with the US Navy USN, the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force JMSDF and the Royal Australian Navy RAN. The 4-day exercise beginning on Thursday includes participation of INS Shivadik and INS Kadmat and P-8I patrol aircraft. The US Navy will be represented by USS Barry, USNS Rappahannock, USNS Bighorn and P-8A patrol aircraft. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force will be represented by JS Kaga, Murasame and Shiranui, in addition to a submarine and P-1 patrol aircraft. The Royal Australian Navy will be represented by HMAS Warramunga.
A team of UN scientists has warned that the search for the origins of the coronavirus has stalled and the window and for solving the mystery is closing fast. In a commentary published on Thursday in the journal Nature, experts recruited by the World Health Organization said the origins investigation is at a critical juncture, requiring urgent collaboration, but has instead come to a standstill. They said that Chinese officials are still reluctant to share some raw data, citing concerns over patient confidentiality. This is All India Radio giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
स्वाधीनता आंदोलन के दौरान भारतीय जनमानस को उत्तेजित कर स्वतंत्रता का अलख जगाने और मातृभूमि के प्रति सेवा, समर्पण और त्याग की ज्वाला प्रज्वलित कर देने वाले अमर गीतों पर आधारित विशेष कार्यक्रम आजादी के तराने सुनना न भूलें। FM गोल्ड 100.1 मेगाहर्ट्ज पर प्रत्येक शुक्रवार शाम 4:45 पर परिक्रमा कार्यक्रम के अंतर्गत आजादी के तराने सिर्फ आकाशवाणी पर।
More than 60 crore 38 lakh vaccine doses of COVID-19 have been administered in the country so far under the nationwide vaccination drive. Over 80 lakh 40,000 vaccine doses were administered to the eligible beneficiaries in the country during the last 24 hours. The Union Health Ministry in a statement said that the country reported 46,164 new cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. The country's active caseload is currently at 3,33,725. The active cases constitute 1.03% of the total reported cases so far. Japan has suspended the use of about 1.63 million doses of the Moderna vaccine due to contamination. The health ministry said foreign materials were found in some doses of a batch of roughly 5,60,000 vials. Takeda Pharmaceuticals, which sells and distributes the vaccine in Japan, said Moderna had put 3 batches on hold out of an abundance of caution. It said an issue at a manufacturing contract site in Spain was a likely cause, but did not elaborate.
In Myanmar, the National Unity Government, NUG, has declared that voluntary and safe return of Rohingya people in a dignified manner as its utmost priority. The NUG is the government in exile formed by the members of parliament elected in November last year union elections. The NUG on Thursday released a statement on the eve of 4th anniversary marking the exodus of the Rohingya people from Myanmar after the military crackdown in the Rakhine province in 2017.
India has strongly condemned the recent terrorist attack on a convoy of the Malian armed forces in the Mopti region that resulted in the killing of 15 Malian soldiers. The External Affairs Ministry has extended deepest condolences to the families of the soldiers, as well as the people and the government of Mali, and wishes for the speedy recovery of all the injured soldiers.
The Sensex and the Nifty today finished almost flat, trading in a narrow range amid negative global cues. The rupee appreciated marginally by 2 paise against the US dollar. A report from the Business World.
The BSE Sensex rose 5 points or 0.01% to close at 55,949. The NSE Nifty also added 2 points or 0.01% to settle at 16,640. Among global markets, Asian stock markets fell, trading in a narrow range. China's Shanghai Composite Index and Hong Kong's Hang Seng both plunged 1.1%. South Korea's Kospi declined 0.6%, while Singapore's Straits Times and Japan's Nikkei managed to add marginally by 0.1%. European stocks were also down in intraday trade. Oil fell for the first session this week amid renewed concerns about demand amid rising COVID-19 infections. In intraday trade, Brent crude was trading around $71.60 per barrel. In the forex market, the rupee appreciated 2 paise to close at 74 rupees and 22 paise against the US dollar. Rajesh Lake for World News, All India Radio.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Washington Post writes, explosion outside Kabul airport. Pentagon spokesman confirms number of casualties is unclear. The Wall Street Journal says at least 3 U.S. troops were injured in an explosion at the Kabul airport. The Washington Post reports President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines is firming up plans to remain in power beyond next year when his single-term limit expires. Gulf Time reports that in coordination with countries and parties on the ground, Qatar has facilitated the evacuation of more than 40,000 people safely from Kabul.
And now a quick look at the headlines once again. At least 13 people killed, including children, in twin blasts outside airport in Afghanistan. Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar briefs leaders of different political parties over current situation in Afghanistan, says evacuating Indians is the top priority of the government. Tajikistan asserts it will not recognize any government in Afghanistan formed through oppression. 4-day sea phase exercise Malabar 2021 begins. India participates with US and Australian naval forces. UN scientists warn search for origins of coronavirus stalled as Chinese officials reluctant to share raw data. More than 60 crore 38 lakh vaccine doses of COVID-19 administered in India so far. And in cricket, England fortifies its position against India with 418 runs in its first innings of the third test at Leeds. India is celebrating the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Bangladesh. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.